At last, a voice for those who pay big government's bills, not those who make big government's bills. You are listening to Speaking of Taxpayers here on Gimme Radio, sponsored by the 362,000 member strong National Taxpayers Union. I am Pete Sepp.
And Natasha Altamirano.
Welcome to this week's program. And since we tend to have a look back at events on this program, speaking of taxpayers, we're going to look back at biblical events. We're talking about lifting a veil, not the dance of seven veils that you may be familiar with from the Bible, Bring Me the Head of John the Baptist, rather lifting one veil, the veil of secrecy around government. And it's making the heads of politicians roll because their schemes, their expenditures, their overcharges, their wasteful ways are being exposed online for citizens to see and take action over. And here to tell us about a victory of biblical proportions for transparency, a guy with an appropriately biblical name, Joshua Culling, our state government affairs manager. Welcome to the program, sir.
Glad to be here as always.
Okay, Josh, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about what's been going on in Colorado with transparency?
Well, a couple of months ago, Representative B.J. Nickel, a Republican in Colorado, introduced House Bill 1288, which would do much of what Pete just alluded to. It would take all government expenditures and revenues and put them in an online searchable format for any taxpayer with an internet connection to easily access and sort through. That bill, it passed the House about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now moves on to the Senate. I mean, it was a really big victory for taxpayers, and kind of an unexpected one at that.
This victory is really a part of a string of victories we've been having with transparency over the last couple of years. First in Washington, D.C., then it's been sweeping across the states like a wind sweeping down the plain of Oklahoma. And of course, as we know, Oklahoma is at least close to Colorado, so that wind keeps sweeping westward. Isn't that true?
Yeah, there are over a dozen states that have followed in the federal government's footsteps and enacted some sort of online spending or revenue database. Oklahoma is a good example. Texas, Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas are all other good ones. Hopefully, if lawmakers in Denver are able to embrace this concept in the Senate, Colorado will add their name to that list and create something where taxpayers can see how their dollars are being spent.
It's very interesting, too, because you think of California and those areas being the left coast. You think of the northeastern portions of the United States also being enamored of big government. You wonder why in the world hasn't transparency taken root there as it seems to have in the Midwest and the southern states. And you think, well, this is because transparency is a conservative issue. After all, it's about wasted tax dollars. Democrats and liberals wouldn't possibly be interested in such a thing, but that's not really the case in your experience, is it?
Exhibit A would be usaspending.gov, which was created by federal legislation introduced and co-sponsored by Senator Tom Coburn, who's widely considered to be one of the most conservative members of the Senate, and then Senator Barack Obama, widely considered to be the most liberal member of the Senate at that time. So there's no better evidence than that to prove that this is a bipartisan issue. It's not about slashing government spending or anything close to that. It's about allowing taxpayers to see how their money is being collected and how it's being spent. It's a good government reform issue.
Yeah, I believe President Obama, then Senator Obama, said something to the effect that there's simply no good argument against transparency in government. And he has, of course, made that a cornerstone of his new presidency. The cornerstone definitely needs to be shaped a little more. Looks like it's crumbling a bit, might be chipping, but we're working on that, folks, rest assured.
And Josh, earlier you described the passage of HB 1288 in the House as a surprise. Has there been much opposition to transparency in Colorado from a partisan standpoint, or has it run into other roadblocks?
Well, the biggest roadblock was the governor's office. Governor Ritter, the day before the bill's final committee hearing in the House, Governor Ritter had a press conference and signed an executive order that would create a transparency database in name only. Essentially, his idea of a transparency database was vastly different from Representative Nichols. It was much weaker and had huge loopholes where government agencies could exempt massive amounts of data from being searchable and added to the database. It also, an executive order is inherently weaker than legislation because it can be changed by the whim of not only this governor, but the next guy who comes into office can either just take it out altogether or, dramatically alter it. So that was kind of a blow for our side, NTU supporting House Bill 1288, because it essentially gave the governor the right to claim to the people that he was a pro-transparency governor. Look at this executive order I just signed, but really it would have done nothing. And it threatened for a while to kill the bill. Now, luckily, we were successful in making very public our opposition to the governor's executive order and make a strong case for why HB 1288 was the better option.
What were some of the things that NTU did? I mean, did we activate any of our 7,300 Colorado members, or do any media interviews or that kind of thing?
Well, we made sure that our membership knew our position by a variety of ways. We sent out alerts to our membership, but we also did quite a bit of media. I did 3 Colorado talk radio interviews in one afternoon. I was out initially before the governor's executive order. I testified in front of the House Finance Committee in support of the bill. We wrote a letter in support, so we were very active. And, this is one of those instances in which I personally feel like we've really made a difference in shifting the course of public debate over this. And, not surprisingly, we haven't really heard anything from the governor since we came out very strongly against his executive order. I think he's playing wait and see to gauge what happens in the Senate.
Now, in some other states, executive order implementation of this has been relatively successful, like Missouri. That comes to mind. In Nebraska, it wasn't the governor, it was actually the treasurer who took the initiative. So sometimes the executive order thing could work out, but it often depends on the personality of the politician doing it. And when it comes down to one guy or one gal versus an entire legislature and their will to do it, you kind of want to go with the legislature.
Sure. Nebraska, Texas, Missouri, these were all executive order states, and they all have fantastic transparency databases. But that was a situation in which the legislature wasn't going to do anything, and these executives came in and said, well, I'm going to do it. I mean, hats off to them. Make no mistake about it. That's fantastic. And, Comptroller Combs in Texas, Treasurer Osborne in Nebraska, and former Governor Blunt in Missouri. Oh, I love those people. They did a great job. But all things held equal, I'll take legislation over an executive order any day of the week, not to mention the fact that there was no reason for the governor to come in and sign an executive order. It was purely political because there was a much stronger pro-transparency bill already making its way through the House.
Okay, so, Gimme Radio listeners, if you want to lift that veil of secrecy behind tax dollars, you want to peek at what government is spending and wasting, don't be deceived by the pretty politicians dancing in front of you with their seductive ways of saying, hey guys, don't worry, I'll take care of it, you just wait and see. Accept no substitutes. Always look for the following elements in a transparency bill. Number 1, enacted by the legislature, especially if the legislature has its own bill and the governor is suddenly anxious to issue an executive order. Don't allow transparency to be limited by dollar amount. In other words, if they say, well, we'll only report major transactions above $25,000 or $50,000. Waste comes in every size, shape, and form, and every penny counts. They should be able to report where every single dollar is going. We also have to look at categories. In some cases, grants and contracts are the only things exposed, and that leaves a lot of general expenditures, everyday appropriated expenses, untouched. What else would you say, Josh, needs to go into the good transparency bill?
Public employee salary and benefit information, I think, is incredibly important. Just to see, I'm from my home state's Ohio. See how many administrators at Ohio State University are making $500,000 plus benefits. I mean, it really, stuff like that is shocking. How much token administrators are paid at public universities and public schools. That's one that it's always been a sticking point for me. I want to see how public employee pensions and salary information.
Unbelievable. And that may be the next step in the transparency movement, folks. Not only more disclosure on public employee benefits and salaries, but maybe even the local level as well. We hope to get into that soon because this movement is spreading like wildfire. So, you've had a look at what's beneath the veil. And again, don't be seduced by politicians. Make sure you get the right kind of transparency. Thank you, Mr. Culling, for shedding light on the subject and opening our eyes.
Hey, glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about a very important follow-on to all the hundreds, some say even thousands, of Tea Party protests that occurred last week around tax filing day. It's very important to us that all that energy, all that spirit, all those hundreds of thousands of people who apparently participated continue to remain active in the taxpayers movement. And the way to do that is to convert these folks into full-time citizen activists. By that, I don't mean they spend 40 hours a week out in the field doing the taxpayers' work, but rather year-round and year after year, they're keeping an eye on important taxpayer issues and speaking up when they're needed to, helping to form local groups, helping to do letter campaigns to members of Congress. All of these things are very important, and they have to be done on an ongoing basis. That's why we have National Taxpayers Conference. Is that not right, Natasha?
That's correct, Pete. National Taxpayers Conference is NTU's biennial gathering of taxpayer activists from around the country. This summer, it will take place June 11th through 13th, just outside the nation's capital in Crystal City, Virginia. You can find information on the conference as well as register online, get hotel information, see a list of speakers on NTU's website. That's www.ntu.org. The conference will feature speakers, current and former elected officials, as well as nuts and bolts training, how to form a state or local level taxpayer group, hands-on learning experiences that are going to feature conference alumni who have fought City Hall and won in previous years.
And see, folks, the National Taxpayers Conference is different from a lot of the other conferences in the Washington, D.C. area where you pretty much just get a free speech and a rubber chicken dinner. What we're talking about here is practical experience and advice imparted to each attendee that he or she can take home and immediately implement on behalf of lower taxes and limited government in their own communities. You may not have heard of people like Barbara Anderson or Robin Ficker. They're not household names, but they all have one thing in common, and that is they have succeeded in limiting taxes in their own backyard. Barbara Anderson, for example, has been described as the Howard Jarvis of the East Coast. Remember Howard Jarvis out in California? I'm mad as heck and I'm not going to take it anymore. Touched off a tax revolt in 1978. Well, in 1980, Barbara Anderson and her allies were able to get a ballot measure on the Massachusetts election slate called Proposition 2.5, which limited property taxes in their state. It's been a tremendous success. We're going to learn from their experiences in getting the measure qualified and passing the measure, and equally important, defending it from constant attack. Unfortunately, that's something you have to worry about, and they have close to 30 years of experience to impart.
While we pride ourselves on being able to draw big names to speak at our conference, what will be most valuable to attendees won't necessarily be the keynote speech at dinner, but some of the networking sessions and panels where activists can meet some of these conference alumni that Pete was talking about, or connect with taxpayers in another state who might be facing a similar issue, a local property tax battle, for example.
But still, if you're interested in a few big names, we'll throw a couple out for you. One is former Comptroller General of the United States, David Walker, who is leading what is called the Fiscal Wake-Up Tour, trying to get Americans more concerned and more active about the biggest financial threat to this nation today, and that is the uncontrolled growth of entitlement spending. Think about the bailout that's been passed. Think about the stimulus package that's been passed. Think about the trillions in commitments the Federal Reserve has made to other companies, and whether the Federal Reserve is something that if it gets into trouble, will taxpayers have to bail it out? That's a big question, but set all those aside. Entitlement programs represent tens of trillions of dollars in liabilities, and they have to be addressed. And Mr. Walker, well, he has a lot of solutions. Another speaker is former Missouri Governor Matt Blunt. He will be talking about his successful campaign to implement transparency at the state level, transparency being the disclosure of all state grants, contracts, and other expenditures online in a searchable database. The website in Missouri has been a tremendous boon in helping taxpayer activists identify possible areas that could be made more efficient in state government, and he's going to talk to citizens about how he did it and why. So these are just a couple of the big names you're going to hear from. A lot of members of Congress have been invited. A number of celebrities have been invited. We're hoping to bring them in from the West Coast. A number of authors and radio talk show hosts. Just wait and see. This is going to be a fantastic event. And again, it's going to be geared towards activism, not just listening to words, but putting words into action. That's why National Taxpayers Conference is the premier event for the limited government movement, because movement implies direction and action. That's what we're trying to do here.
Once again, you can register online at ntu.org. Our early bird rate of $99 has just been extended until the end of the month, so don't delay. You can also get information on the hotel. It'll be held at the Hyatt Regency Crystal City, just a short taxi or metro ride away from Reagan National Airport. And you'll be able to find updated lists of speakers, an agenda, and all sorts of conference information. ntu.org. Register today.
Yeah, folks, it may be easy to think of June 13th as some very distant date, like kids get out for summer vacation. Father's Day will be approaching by that point, but really, it's less than 7 weeks away. So it's very vital that folks sign up for this event now, make their commitment to attend, and get informed and get active about the limited government movement. Again, that's ntu.org. Take advantage of the early bird rate and a great hotel discount. And in this segment of Speaking of Taxpayers, the ever-popular outrage of the week, and boy, do we have a doozy for you today. It is the Troubled Asset Relief Program. No, we've talked about the $700 billion the federal government put up in the fall of last year to supposedly buy up toxic assets at lending institutions, stabilize the credit markets, and otherwise work a whole bunch of magic that politicians normally tell us they can do. No. We know that program is flawed. We know it's fundamentally immoral to bail out institutions that were careless in the first place with money from people who were careful. But the real outrage with TARP comes from a new report from the Treasury Inspector General, just released this week, taking the Treasury to task for failing to exercise even the most basic oversight and disclosure provisions of who's getting TARP funds, and again, that's Troubled Asset Relief Program. Who's getting TARP funds? How are they getting them? What are they using them for? We've been almost 6 months into this bailout, and still we do not have the oversight and accountability we were promised by the Bush administration and the Obama administration over this program. I quote from the report, "The sheer size of the program is so large and leverage being provided to the private equity participants so beneficial that the taxpayer risk is many times that of the private parties, thereby potentially skewing the economic incentives." What does that mean in plain language, folks? It means taxpayers are being played for suckers, just as we have in the past with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, with various corporations getting bailouts from the Federal Deposit Insurance entity, with loans being made to businesses from the federal government. They have very little to lose because if they default, taxpayers foot the bill and they just reincorporate. Isn't that a lousy way to do business with the taxpayers' dollars, Natasha?
Yes, it is, Pete.
So, what can we do to rectify this problem? Well, there's a bill before the House of Representatives that would strengthen oversight of the TARP program. The bill is called the TARP Accountability and Disclosure Act, H.R. 1242. It's not the best bill, but it's an important step forward because what it does is require the Treasury to take more steps to provide near real-time information to government inspectors on who's getting TARP money and what are they doing with it. Now, we think, of course, that all those transactions ought to be available for the average taxpayer to view in near real time, online, so we can see where our money is going. And after all, it is our money, not the money of the inspectors or the other Treasury officials. But still in all, this is the direction we should be going in. This is the direction we were promised Congress and the Treasury would take when they enacted this legislation, spending $700 billion of our money. So again, that bill number, H.R. 1242, the TARP Accountability and Disclosure Act. Take a look at it online at thomas.loc.gov or visit our website where we will have more information on the TARP program and accountability measures. That website address is, I forget, oh yes, www.ntu.org. Is that correct, Natasha?
That's right, Pete. This just about wraps up this week's edition of Speaking of Taxpayers. As usual, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
And this is Pete Sepp reminding you, you have the power to fight the power if you speak truth to power. And we speak truth to power through Speaking of Taxpayers. On behalf of the National Taxpayers Union,